Hello and welcome to the Athletic Soccer Show. This is your World Cup post game. On the channel, we're going to be looking at all four of the games that we've seen today. The last of the four games strung out across the course of the day. I imagine many of you across the pond will be glad the end of those 5 a.m. or 2 a.m. in fact on the West Coast starts. I'm Jack Collins and I'll be your host today. And I'm joined by the Athletic's very own Tim Spiers. Tim, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, the 10 a.m.'s early enough for us over here, to be honest, but I feel bad for moaning about that now, really.
Honestly, I've been struggling getting up at the 10s, so I really do feel for anyone who's been shifting along on those 5 a.m.s. A massive salute to everyone going on across the pond and getting all of those games in. At least that torture is over. Tim, you've been following Portugal throughout this tournament for the Athletic, so that feels as good a place to start as any. They've won 2-0 against Uruguay, securing their progress, shall we say, to the next round. And this was a game that, well, I'd say the first half was dull, and that's probably an understatement, but it did spring into life in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, dull first halves they're just completely standard for this tournament now, right?
Yeah.
Is it 20 27 goals in the first halves, and I think it's like must be about 54 or 55 now in second halves.
That's incredible.
So it is, and someone more intelligent than me, I'm sure, will have a really good answer for why that is. I mean, I guess something that sort of springs out is lack of prep time for a lot of these teams, so they're just sort of easing their way into games. Maybe it's the heat, I don't know, but it's a really common theme throughout the tournament. And yeah, today was no different. One of the worst first halves probably so far. But yeah, it did really come to life after the break. It kind of felt like Uruguay was spoiling the game a bit in the first half, very, very deliberately playing defensive. I felt like they were playing for a draw, to be honest, and sort of hedging their bets that if they got a decent point against Portugal, then they beat Ghana to go through. As it is, they've lost, and even if they beat Ghana now, they're not guaranteed to go through.
Although you'd imagine that would be enough.
You would imagine. I mean, Portugal will make changes now for that third game against South Korea, and South Korea play some decent football in this tournament, but it's asking a lot for them, particularly with Son Heung-min, who I'm sure we'll talk about later. Not playing that well. You'd imagine Uruguay, yeah, still got a decent chance of getting through. Although what a game that's going to be, by the way, against Ghana. But yeah, so they kind of came to life in the second half, create some good chances, generate some really good momentum. And I did kind of feel that they were going to nick a draw. But then Fernando Santos made a really smart sort of triple change, brought in a couple of midfielders and exerted some control in midfield. So that combined with an absolutely ludicrous penalty decision, which I still can't believe, actually. Has meant that Portugal have won, deservedly so. But like against Ghana with Portugal, they nearly blew it at the end when Diogo Costa drops the ball in the last minute of stoppage time and nearly gives away a third goal. So yeah, they just about got through that one, and they just about got through this one. But you've got to say, for a team that hasn't performed at its best yet, to be through from a really, really tough group with a game to spare, looks pretty good for them, to be honest. And they've definitely got the talent to go really deep in the tournament.
This is the thing, right? Because Portugal are such a talented squad, and you look at this and you think maybe this team should perform performance-wise at the very least better than what they have been doing, and we've seen this within the way that Fernando Sanchez manages and the way he coaches, and there's a lot of negativity and pragmatism around his style, and I think that's kind of boiled over in Portugal to a point now as well, and you're starting to see that in the press out there. But I mean, I was looking at Portugal before the tournament, and I think they'd only lost 5 times in the last 32 games pre-tournament, and none of them by more than a single goal. And ultimately, you're looking at that and going, right, yeah, could this team be better? Should they have automatically qualified? Yes, they should. They shouldn't have been in a position where that late goal from Serbia could have put them into the playoffs in the first place. Fine, they got through those playoffs without any problems, but you're looking at this Portugal side and saying you should be automatically qualifying for tournaments, whatever the cost, because that's how good this squad is. But when it comes to tournament football, and we've seen this with the kind of pragmatism of Southgate to a point, and also Deschamps and Tite to a point with Brazil as well. It gets to this point, you go, right, let's not lose. We can win 1-0 because we have the capacity to do that. And that's how Portugal won in 2016. And it looks like that manner of performance is going to be what they're going to rely on again.
Yeah, the best defense, as long as you've got a decent team in front of that, will often win a tournament. And I've been covering Portugal for sort of the last couple of years now. I have been surprised at the amount of negativity towards Fernando Santos. The man who delivered them Euro 2016 and the inaugural Nations League as well in 2019. Coming from a nation that's never won anything and spent a couple of decades in the international wilderness, really, before the 90s. You're right. I think you're right to mention Southgate. It is a similar debate. They want the handbrake to be taken off. They've got an awful lot of attacking talent, some of whom are only good enough for the bench. Some of them aren't even here in the tournament. And it's a similar debate to what we've seen with Southgate. The Ronaldo debate's a very similar one to what we've seen in England as well over the past year or so. Should he start, or is he holding them back? Is he holding back, young, attacking, vibrant talents? Again, it's in a very similar debate. Man United. I've actually been quite impressed with Ronaldo in the first two games. I feel like he's got, I guess we should have expected it really, but a renewed vigour to prove, not that he needs to, not to prove himself, but just to remind everybody in his eyes that he is the world's greatest player. And I guess what better way to put two fingers up to all of his detractors than, well, by winning the World Cup. I mean, my God, it'll be some story.
It would be quite the story.
The World Cup's only free agent lifts the trophy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you wouldn't put it past him either, even if these aren't vintage Ronaldo performances. And no. I agree with you. I don't think he was great first game. I thought he was much improved today, and there are elements of this where you're going, right, Portugal has started to play a little bit more towards his strengths, looking at those aerial points and those focal points to try and hit to bring other people into play. And there was a lovely couple of first time passes around the corner, one for Rafael Leao that, it was like, okay, right, cool. We're starting to see the options opening up around him, and that should benefit Cristiano Ronaldo. But I think that debate will rage on whether we discuss it or not. But when you look at this kind of final game now, and it's quite an interesting one because Portugal could rotate, and as you said, and I think they will to an extent. I think we'll see the likes of Palhinha. I think we'll see the likes of Mateus Nunes come in and get those kind of minutes that perhaps they've just been on the fringe of getting anyway. But I don't think it'll be wholesale changes because winning this group is massive in that you don't get Brazil. And no one wants Brazil. As much as a Lusophone derby would be wonderful for everyone involved and everyone could understand each other on the pitch, it's the one thing that Portugal really could do without at this stage of the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. It will be finished top at all costs. That they'll be plotting their route now to the last stage of the tournament. I mean, they've got a couple of injury concerns. Otavia missed the game tonight. Ruben Neves picked up what looked like a pretty bad knock. Obviously, Nuno Mendes went off injured as well, which would be really. It was a really sad moment. Actually, he was in tears, wasn't he, when he was leaving the field?
It was really upsetting.
He was playing pretty well as well. That's a shame. But as I said earlier, like the changes they made late on, with Palhinha coming on, with Mateus Nunes coming on, it actually improved Portugal in that moment and allowed them to gain some control in the game. It's a very un-Fernando Santos change when he sent on Rafael Leao for Ruben Neves.
Well, when they dropped the second pivot, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. That's a very non-you move at 1-0 up.
Yeah, I was live blogging on The Athletic, and I was questioning who's the manager because
who are you and what have you done with Fernando Santos?
Really not like him. So yeah, I'd love to see Rafael Leao start. I guess if there is a clamour around this Portugal squad and team as to who should be in it, it is for him. Obviously MVP in Serie A last year for AC Milan, came on and scored against Ghana. An exciting player. I don't see him muscling his way into this team. I think we've seen the role of substitutes and second halves play such an important part in this World Cup, and I think he's ideal to come on in the second half. But yeah, against South Korea, you'd think that'd be one for him to start. Whether he rests Ronaldo or not, I don't know. That'd be based purely, I guess, on whether he needs the minutes for fitness. Not played a huge amount of football in sort of the past few weeks and months, but he'll certainly want to start because. Doesn't look like he scored tonight, so he'll be wanting more World Cup goals, more international goals. He probably thinks he can win the Golden Boot as well. So, I bet he was gutted he wasn't off the field. But he could easily have 2 goals tonight. If he was an inch taller, he would have scored with that header, and then if he was on the field, he would have taken the penalty. But as it is, Bruno Fernandes, who got 2 assists in the first game, scored twice in their last friendly as well before the tournament started. He's in fantastic form. I think him and Bernardo Silva are going to be the ones that are going to lead Portugal deep into this tournament if that's where they're destined to go.
Yeah, I agree. The twin engines of this team, really, and it does feel like that. From the opposite sides of Manchester as well, which makes life interesting at the very least, I imagine, if you're in that city. But I do completely agree, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the lineup looks like in this Portugal game, because as you say, I think we might see Mateus and Paulinho in the pivot together, which is quite nice. Obviously, we saw that at Sporting for a couple of years, and it took them to heights unprecedented in recent times. I was going to say unprecedented heights, but that would be very unfair to the history of that football club. But then you look at how this is going to change, and yeah, it was sad seeing Mensch go off. But if you're going to have someone to come on, Rafael Guerreiro is not a bad option to have at left back. And if it did come to the worst and something went wrong there, you bring Cancelo over to that side and put Diego Dalot on the other. So there's a lot of depth in this Portugal side, and
no, that's it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would also say. Gonçalo Ramos, his form coming into this tournament for Benfica, 9 goals in 11 games, came on and scored on his debut and got an assist against Nigeria a couple of weeks ago. Looks sharp off the bench. He's another one I'd love to see get some more minutes. They have got a really good squad. The fact that Renato Sanchez, arguably their best player at the Euros last year, made such a difference when he was coming off the bench for those driving runs. He's not even here, which I find incredible, really. So
we haven't seen Vitinha for a minute. Like, there's a lot in here, isn't there?
No, definitely. João Vitinha was left out as well, which was a surprise, given that he's been in pretty much every Portugal squad for the last 10 years and just dropped out at the last minute, from his performances for Wolves. So big strength and depth in every position, really. Keeper positions as well. A little bit worried about them at centre half. Pepe, obviously, still a very competent defender at this level, but if you've got a quick striker or a quick forward or two, you're going to be targeting him, getting in behind. And they lost Danilo Pereira to a bizarre incident. Or I say bizarre incident, we don't even know what it was, but basically he broke his ribs in training and nobody knows how he did it, which is
one of those.
It's really odd that Fernando Santos is saying, yeah, we know he's broken his ribs and it happened in training, but we're not sure where or how, which is really odd. So broken ribs, you can't imagine he's going to be back in anytime soon. So they have got a couple of injury worries, which is why it's so good from their point of view that they've got through with a game to spare.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the other game in this group, which saw South Korea take on Ghana today. Ghana won this 3-2. Now, this was a thriller from kind of the get-go in so many ways, Tim, because Korea started the better, I thought, of the two sides. Had that first 20 minutes that was pretty much all them. It was a question of when they were going to score rather than if. And suddenly they were 2-0 down and pulled it back. Forgot again. It was all over the place, this one.
It was all over the place. I think South Korea, Uruguay. Am I right in saying there was no shots on target in that match?
If there was, it didn't feel like it. Let's put it that way.
And then in this game, at the 70-minute mark, you'd had 6 shots on target from both teams and 5 goals. It was just a bit bonkers, really. It shows you the sort of desperation when you get into the second games. Particularly if you've got a tough one in your final group game. First game, you can draw or lose and get over it. But second game, I think we saw a bit of desperation in a couple of matches today from certain teams, knowing that basically they had to win. Cameroon being the obvious example. South Korea, they did start really well. They had like 6 or 7 corners, mostly atrocious from Son. I'm really concerned about it. It's such a shame to see him like a shadow of his former self. I watched Spurs for the Athletic week in, week out, and part of me thought, is he holding himself back for the World Cup? He just doesn't look himself this season. He's only scored in 2 matches for Spurs this year. But no, he just seems to be half a yard off it. His movement's not the same. He looked really frustrated today. He was sort of doing his Ronaldo act, getting frustrated with his teammates. So that was a key part of the South Korea performance. I mentioned about his poor corner kicks. Ghana showed him how it was done with their set plays. Jordan Ayew, 2 balls sort of right into the meat of the 6-yard box, and South Korea just didn't know how to deal with it. I know people will make the obvious sort of height argument between the two teams, but South Korea actually won more aerial duels than Ghana in this game, so it wasn't necessarily down to that. I'd just put it down to fantastic deliveries.
Yeah, Kudus is hardly the biggest man in the world, is he? This is not a man who strikes you as the aerial threat within this side.
Yeah, exactly. Well, his was a perfect header, just sort of
Beautiful.
kissed off his head right to the corner, and I did not see South Korea coming back into it because their body language was so poor. They were so despondent when they were coming off at half time. You know,
Yeah.
they looked lost. Really, they looked completely shell shocked by those two goals. I mean, it took them until the 53rd minute of their second game to have their first shot on target at the tournament. Obviously, as we mentioned, Son's not playing very well, but Hwang Hee-chan not fit enough to play yet either. He's had a horrible year for Wolves, but still does score pretty regularly for South Korea. So they're missing him as well. And then Ghana sort of self-imploded. It was a really peculiar passage of play. They gave the ball away in the lead up to both goals. I think it was Tariq Lamptey for the first, just sort of running into a cul-de-sac. And then a great cross from Lee Kang-in, wasn't it? I think it was his cross.
About his first touch of the ball as well.
Why is he not starting? Why is he not starting?
There are questions.
Well, yeah, and like Cho, who didn't start the first game with an absolutely brilliant header, looked astonished that he'd scored. By the way, he's like, "What? I've scored!" And then the camera pans to the crowd, and they're the same, like literally, because it came out of absolutely nowhere. And then the second goal, I think it was a bit of self-sabotage from Mensah, who gives the ball away. And then it was Cho who leapt above Mensah.
This
Again,
was
a
a
fantastic
huge
header.
leap. This was a massive leap. That was a big takeaway. I was like, that man is taking off. We've got, he's had the green signs. He's gone fully. He's just absolutely leapt through the air.
We've seen some good headers in this tournament.
Yeah, we have.
Alphonso Davies is probably still my favourite, just the way that he ran onto it at such pace. But yeah, they sort of they really seized the moment, and it sort of looked like only one winner at that stage. And then again, a bit of self-sabotage from South Korea, who allowed a 3-on-3 in their own box. And kudos to Kudus, who scores again with a really nice finish.
Very good.
And sorry. But yeah, he'll be one, I think, that's, well, he's making, there are quite a few players that are making a sort of a breakthrough during this tournament, but he's definitely one. And Cho would be another because he's out playing in South Korea, and with the quality of his sort of two finishes, you'd imagine it's nice that we don't know of a player. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's rare, isn't it? We were talking about this before the
days.
World Cup began. Long gone are the days where you start to see the Brazil team. I wonder who these lads are. Those days are so far behind us. But there is the occasional player who comes from nowhere, and it does feel like it's Choge-san. Just in terms of, I know he's 24 years old, playing for Jimbuk Motors. I imagine that there's going to be some interest in acquiring his services from Europe. I mean, I've already made the case that Fulham could do with a backup number 9 that works. So so maybe the people are watching, but we shall see. But a really good win for Ghana this. And to be honest, I think on the balance of the chances created, etc., they probably just about deserved it. I think it was one of those games where Korea were probably the better side. Ghana created the better opportunities. And we've had a couple of those kind of games. In fact, you can say the exact same thing about the Korea-Uruguay game. Uruguay looked the most likely to score. Korea were probably the better side. Which is probably quite damning on how Korea are going to go into this final game against Portugal. But does put right onto the map here for Ghana in terms of they win or draw against Uruguay, and they're probably, I suppose we have to think about all the circumstances, but they're probably into the last 16. And given the history between Ghana and Uruguay, that sets that one up really nicely.
Honestly, I can't wait. I love these narratives that the World Cup throws up. That's going to be a hell of a game. I generally crossed my mind that maybe Suarez didn't start today because he's like, hold me back for Ghana. Like I'm not missing that game. A fair play to Ghana. We said it's a really, really tough group, but they were definitely outsiders coming into it. They're the lowest ranked team in the tournament for a start. I think they're their worst ever AFCON performance in January. They're the youngest team at the tournament. So
there's a lot of new faces as well, right? They've brought in not dual nationals, and I was writing a preview for them. I was like, this is a new chapter in Ghana's history with these new dual nationals coming in. I just don't know if the ink's going to be dry enough yet for them to actually be able to progress in the tournament. But it looks very sharp. It looks very bright. I'm sure Inaki Williams will be claiming that assist for Mohamed Kudus for the third one all night long. Although how much he knew about it, a stress is probably not correct. But yeah, I'm really, really impressed with Ghana, and it feels like they're ticking along nicely under Otto Addo. And whatever happens, I think in that final game, there's been enough to be proud of to think that things are moving forward and moving in the right direction for Ghana, because this has been, as you say, a tough group, and they've acquitted themselves really well in both games so far.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is a naivety about them. I think you would have to say that if you look at the way that they've conceded 5 goals in 2 games, that's going to be a big concern in the Uruguay game, and you just hope that they channel the extreme emotion of that game in the right way, because I'm sure we'll be reading and listening and hearing a lot about this in the next few days coming up to this grudge match. But this is England's, hand of God Maradona moment. This is something which is going to completely captivate the country over the next few days. The idea of getting revenge, and it would be so sweet, wouldn't it, for them to dump Uruguay and Suarez out, who's still in the Uruguay team, 12 years on. Yeah. But you just hope they just need to channel that emotion.
Somehow, after his performance in the first game, I think if I was Diego Alonso, I might have sent him on the plane home that night, to be perfectly honest with you. It did feel like one of those. Let's come on to Group G, and I think we probably should start with Brazil against Switzerland. Brazil huffed and puffed him, and it did feel for a while like they weren't going to get the breakthrough, especially when that Vini Jr. goal was ruled out. We'll talk about that and the phases of play argument in a little bit, but they got this over the line, and Casemiro stepped up. You can't give Casemiro this kind of ball space. Everyone seems to just forget he's a really, really good ball striker.
Yeah, definitely, and that just him being there made a difference, because Brazil weren't quite getting enough numbers forward into the right positions. I thought Switzerland played really well. To be fair, Switzerland holding Brazil to a draw in the World Cup, it wasn't going to be a massive surprise. Certainly not to me. They've done it before for a start.
They did the last one, didn't they?
Exactly. Yeah. So they're really organised and hard to beat team. They'd set up in their shape beautifully. It was. I mean, we talk about poor first halves. I mean, this was awful. The highlight of the first half was undoubtedly Ronaldo being shown on the big screen, immediately followed by a fan in the crowd with 2002 Ronaldo hair. That was massively the highlight of the first half.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Switzerland's XG at halftime was 0.03. Which shows you,
it's slightly above what Costa Rica's was the other day against Spain.
But fair play. A draw's pretty much the limit of their ambitions in normal circumstances against Brazil, who I think definitely missed Neymar. You hear an argument about whether Brazil can play better without him. I don't buy that. I thought Richarlison looked really isolated, which you would expect, but still, the others just weren't getting close enough to him. And after 60 minutes, it was set up for a shock. Switzerland started pushing forward a little bit and causing a couple of problems, couple of half chances. But then again, we talk about subs changing the game. Anthony, Jesus, Bruno Guimaraes comes on, and Brazil don't look any weaker for it. In fact, they look stronger to me. Again, really good changes. They're through with the game to spare. A lot of these guys can get game time in their last match against Cameroon. And interesting to see the celebrations at full time, pretty wild celebrations from Brazil. Obviously so keen to get this done with a game to spare, but you can feel a bit of momentum about them, and you're not seeing many weaknesses either. Them and France are certainly as close to a complete team as we've seen so far. I don't think Brazil have conceded a shot on target yet, which is pretty remarkable. So, they look very, very well set up to go very deep in the tournament.
Yeah, I'd agree. I can't see many spots where you can get at this Brazil side. Maybe the overloads if you can double down on getting players around the fullbacks. But Eder Militao stepped in at right back and looked excellent. I kind of expected him to start the tournament, to be honest, at right back, and the fact he didn't was a little bit of a surprise. But they just look so good, and the fact that the fullbacks sit in the shape and make it that kind of 4-2-4 and let the front men just do the damage means that the damage limitation is so easily kind of like obvious what they're going to do with it, and it makes loads of sense. So yeah, I think at the moment it feels like Brazil are the team to beat, and like you say, there's that momentum and also that kind of togetherness. I think about the Seleção, this time round. They feel like a really united group, and I think we've seen that in the kind of social media building up to the tournament as well. But once you're out there and you see everyone piling in and those celebrations, as you say, it kind of really rams it home just how good they are. On Switzerland, Peter Utzler was on here the other day, and he said they are painfully effective, which I think is probably the best description of them I've heard in a while. I called them on Twitter earlier the dementors of international football. They suck the soul out of games, but they do get it done, and I don't really mean that as a massive negative. Like, I mean, in terms of viewing pleasure, I think for a neutral it is a negative, but generally they're very good at what they do, but they're just not fun to watch whatsoever.
No, they're not. I mean, technically they're very good, and they had 47% possession in this game, which I was surprised to read afterwards. I think something like 500 passes to Brazil's 550, albeit a lot of that was in their own half, but still, they're just a bit inhibited with a lack of attacking ambition. That could get them to sort of, quarterfinal level, but
it makes them a horrible proposition for anyone in the last 16. I think, no, and especially with what they did to France. I think no one's going to go, "Oh, we've got Switzerland, that'll be all right." You're going, "Oh, we've got Switzerland."
No, absolutely, and this was a really good test for Brazil because they'll come up against similar opposition in the knockout stage, but better teams. I guess that's the one thing you say about Brazil is they haven't been fully tested by a top level team yet because it's so early in the tournament, but still you can only beat what's put in front of you, and they've done that pretty clinically. So Switzerland against Serbia, I would fancy Switzerland against the not chaos of Serbia, but it is a little bit like that. I'm not sure what Serbia's attacking plans are sometimes. They've got some very good attacking creative talents, but as for a coherent plan to score football goals, I'm not sure it's all there really. I would fancy the control of Switzerland in that final game, but it might be a tight one.
It does feel a bit control versus chaos, but we'll come on to the Serbia game. They drew 3-3 with Cameroon today, and again, a hell of a game. We've talked about the exciting game second in each of these groups, which I think gives us a little lift as we go into them. But the 10 a.m.s have been slow, generally, I think, across the course of this tournament. This was anything but. It was a beautiful farewell to the 10 a.m. slot and a game that really gave us everything. I saw it described as a kind of AFCON game, which I thought was quite a nice descriptor, in that it did have that kind of feeling of, you know what, go for it. And Serbia, as you say, are a bit like that. And Cameroon went, all right, we'll match you for chaos. And it ended up being 3-3.
Yeah, I was on a podcast last night and I was slating the 10 a.m. kickoffs. I was like, and I think I saw the amount of goals that Cameroon tend to score, and I was like, yeah, this last one's going to be a real struggle. And then it ends up that 43% of all goals scored in the 10 a.m. kickoffs came in this game. And I was actually quite annoyed when there were only 6 minutes of stoppage time in the first half, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. I was like, keep playing. Mitrovic will score in a minute.
Yeah. I guess maybe this is what stems from having a group where there's one very dominant team that is going to win the group, and the three fairly evenly matched teams below them are just absolutely desperate when it comes to their second game of the tournament, certainly from Cameroon's point of view, since they've got Brazil in their last game. Serbia probably would have taken a point before the game, I think, and maybe thought, okay, beat Switzerland to go through. But as soon as they were 3-1 up, they'll be absolutely kicking themselves, Not just the fact that they've given 2 goals away, but the chances they had to win it. Yeah. If Mitrovic is in his early season form, then I think they win this game. Serbia looks so good in patches, and then they just come up with this sort of bonkers defending.
They brought when Pavlovic went off, everything just fell apart, and it really suddenly you're like, oh, our entire defensive strategy revolves around a very, very young defender from RB Salzburg. That's not what you want to be hearing, especially with Nikola Milenkovic on the other side, who's a very good defender.
Yeah, definitely. That's the thing in terms of structure. Offensively and defensively, they're just a bit haphazard, really. No Vlahovic or Jovic today. I'm assuming injuries for both that potentially might keep out that last game. I don't know.
Vlahovic definitely, but Jovic looked like he was going to come on at one point, and then they sat him down and made a different sub instead, which just did feel like a bit of a strange move because Mitrovic didn't feel like he could move after the 60th minute mark, and that's coming from a Fulham fan.
Yeah, he was struggling. I love Abubakar's goal, and that was obviously the highlight of this game.
Glorious. And especially because he thought it was offside. He didn't care.
There's no doubt in my mind that he just did not care. He's like, right, I'm offside, because he didn't celebrate.
No.
I'm just going to do what the hell I want here. It's the coolest finish you've ever seen. Yeah, I was reading about his weird one-sided beef with Mo Salah as well during the game.
Very
Michael Bailey
amusing.
from The Athletic. What the hell is that about? It's proper like angry old man yells at cloud type stuff.
It's like
I
he
don't think,
the double down after there was no response as well. He was like, I don't care what people say. Like, no one's been talking about this, Vincent. Like, it's absolutely fine. It's just you talking about this.
it's really weird for anyone who hasn't seen. He's basically just laid into Salah on a couple of occasions. I can't really think of any good reason why. He just said, "I'm not impressed by him. I can do what he does. I just haven't had the right opportunities in my career." Just a really odd beef. And yeah, he's still had a very interesting career. I think he's out in Saudi Arabia at the moment.
Yeah, I believe so.
Abubakar, having played for sort of Porto and Besiktas earlier in his career, but yeah, again another one who might get a move in January or later in the summer. So yeah, an interesting day
United
for,
need a 9, don't they now? So
yeah,
here you go. There's your big opportunity, Vincent. You can go to Manchester United and play as the 9.
He'd be the heir to who's that guy from Watford who went to Man United, the really random striker signing a couple of years ago. That's it. Yeah, he's sort of be the natural heir to him because apparently he's only 30, Abubakar, but he doesn't look 30 to me. There might be a bit of a steward's inquiry about his age there, but yeah. A strange day for Cameroon with starting with Onana not playing and it seems like he's left. He's gone.
Yeah. It seems like a really strange. Did they not? It came from this idea that, for anyone who didn't see it, Anana's left because there was a tactical discussion between him and the coach wants him to play more like a traditional goalkeeper in inverted commas. That's not really Anana's game, so he said no and walked out of the camp. What that makes me think is that Cameroon didn't have this discussion before the tournament, which does seem an oversight.
Well, as the Athletics' John Muller pointed out on Twitter, they actually conceded one of their goals after a set piece, from a set piece after the keeper had kicked it along. I just find it, if that's the true story, that it's just about how to take goal kicks. I mean, honestly, he's not there for himself. He's there for Cameroon. Of all the principled reasons not to play in this World Cup, right? And there are quite a few.
The manager wanted me to kick it.
How you take your goal kicks is surely pretty low down the list. I find it remarkable, to be honest. And if that's the real story, then he should feel ashamed of himself because he could have saved a couple of those goals today and they'd have won and have a really good chance of getting through. So it's a crazy story.
Yeah, bit of a mad one. It leaves us in this group with 2 games to go. As you say, the chaos of Serbia against the kind of control of Switzerland is the big one. I think this felt like Cameroon's big opportunity to try and secure a place. I can't see them beating, even if Brazil rotate very heavily, and ultimately I don't think it's going to be their year, although I have been impressed by them, and look, we can't write anything off at this tournament after some of the upsets we've seen, and Cameroon are a very good side, but I still think Brazil probably have enough to put them away, which means that this Serbia-Switzerland game becomes a bit of a shootout. It was in the last World Cup in this group that had Serbia, Switzerland and Brazil in it as well. And obviously that game was incredibly politically charged on top of everything else going on. And I think that does make this really, really interesting. Obviously we talked about the Ghana-Uruguay game in terms of revenge. This is a bit of a revenge mission for Serbia as well. And I think that will start to play on people's minds.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right about Cameroon. I just, even allowing for wholesale Brazil changes, I can't see them getting the win that they need. It'll be a huge shock. We talk about Saudi Arabia beating Argentina. I think Cameroon beating Brazil, Brazil would definitely be up there. Sort of mentioned sort of control v chaos. I think that's obviously in Switzerland's favour that they only need a point from this one to get through. But Serbia are a bit unpredictable. They beat Portugal to get to this tournament. They shouldn't be underestimated. If they can get a couple of those extra attacking players in the team as well.
They've got some really good back. That made a massive difference today compared to what we saw at Brazil, I thought.
They've got some really good technically gifted players. And they will cause Switzerland problems. Depending on who scores first, I think you can see it being a bit of a ding dong shootout. You definitely want Serbia to score first. I think Switzerland could really strangle the game if they do get an early goal, but it's how willing are they to commit players forward in a bid to do that, or are they going to play for a draw, which obviously is going to be pretty dangerous. So pretty interesting tactical battle. Like you said, there's history in this one as well. Switzerland, Serbia, and Ghana, Uruguay, 2 of the games of the week for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But on that note, I think it's probably time for us to call it a day here. So all that's left for me to do, Tim, is to say thank you so much for joining us on the Athletic Soccer Show's World Cup post game. It's been a real pleasure.
Good stuff, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, thank you to everyone for listening, for tuning in on YouTube or podcast, wherever you are listening to the Athletic Soccer Show. I've been Jack Collins, and we will see you tomorrow. Take it easy.